Okay, I have 3 o'clock, and as Lori knows, I'm a real stickler for starting class on time. So it's probably fitting that we start the webinar on time as well. I'd like to welcome all of you to the webinar entitled Incorporating the Grand Challenges for Social Work into Social Work Education Implications and Strategies. Lori and I actually, before I share my screen, we just got back from the Council on Social Work Education's annual program meeting a few days ago in Kansas City. And we're actually thrilled that we have an hour because we only had a half hour there to present. So we can unpack a few things that we didn't get to say. And we were just saying, it's nice to be sitting down and not walking 25,000 steps a day. So we're already having a great time. So let me pull up my PowerPoint here, and we'll go ahead and get started. And we'll make sure that all of you have access to the materials as well. And we'll talk a little bit about how to access those. So let me just pull it up. All right. So as I said, welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Dawn Apgar, and I'm an associate professor at Seton Hall University, which is in South Orange, New Jersey. We're pretty well known for our basketball team. We're about 8 miles outside of New York City, and I am the director of the undergraduate social work program. I'm also the lead faculty on research, and I oversee this, what we call the senior research seminar, which is our capstone course for graduating seniors. And I'm going to be talking a little bit, and Lori will be talking a lot more about the experiences that students have in that course related to the grand challenges. Lori, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Lori Zaruzin. I was an undergrad at Seton Hall, and then did my MSW at Columbia University. I'm part-time faculty at Seton Hall University, where I teach a class on Intro to Gerontology and provide clinical social work counseling services full-time in a private practice.
So Donna thanked us for the PowerPoint. Actually, you're going to have better than the PowerPoint. So you'll have the recording, you'll have the PowerPoint, but for those of you that are very versed with your phone, you could actually focus it at this slide and use the QR code and get access to the article. So today we're actually going to be presenting the results of 2 different studies, both of which have been published. And so there's much more in the article that we won't go over today, but you would have access to both of those articles. This is the first one, or you could just Google it from your machine if you're good at multitasking, which is going to talk a little bit about the grand challenges related to MSW graduates and some implications for graduate education. This came out in advances in social work, and then we'll talk a little bit. Okay, well, I'll try to brainstorm that. We'll figure it out. We'll make sure I'll even give you a copy of the article, but and then we're going to talk a little bit later about undergraduate. So for those of you that are teaching at either level, this will relate to you. I guess I'm better at a PowerPoint than I am a QR code. So I'll make sure you get the article. Okay. Don't worry about the QR code. No one focus on, I will get you a PDF of the article, I promise. So what are we going to do today? We're going to talk a little bit about student attitudes and views about the about the grand challenges. And so we did an empirical study looking at the correlates of student views about the grand challenges. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about some of the motivators and the barriers to enhancing student access and interest in working with the grand challenges. And then we're going to end by talking a little bit about a curricular sort of redesign and a curricular strategy for getting students more interested. And we certainly can share some of the educational resources related to that as well. So that's what we're going to cover. So Lori's going to we may be preaching to the choir here, but we're going to talk to you a little bit about the grand challenges. Lori's wearing, I don't know if you can see her vote button, which inspired me, and I'm wearing my grand challenges button. I don't go anywhere without it. So Lori will talk about the grand challenges first, and then I'll talk a little bit more about our study.
So David Hilbrand's grand challenges represent a monumental contribution to the field of mathematics. His work has not only advanced mathematical knowledge, but has also provided a framework for understanding the foundational issues that underpin the discipline. The legacy of Hilbert's problems continue to resonate in contemporary mathematical research, inspiring new generations of mathematicians to explore the depths of mathematical inquiry. As the quest for solutions to these problems persists, the implications for Hilbert's work extend far beyond mathematics, influencing diverse fields and professions. The purpose of the grand challenges extends beyond mere problem solving. They serve as a catalyst for innovation and intellectual growth. These challenges not only stimulate rigorous inquiry, but also encourage interdisciplinary collaboration. Grand challenges can illuminate the limitations of existing theories and practices, promoting a reevaluation of foundational concepts. Consequently, the pursuit of these challenges not only advances knowledge, but also enhances the autonomy of the profession, as practitioners are empowered to explore uncharted territories and develop novel solutions. Engagement with grand challenges cultivates a culture of resilience and adaptability, essential traits in an ever-evolving professional landscape. As practitioners grapple with complex and often ambiguous problems, they develop a nuanced understanding of the interplay between theory and practice, ultimately contributing to the advancement of their disciplines. The significance of grand challenges lies not only in their potential to yield concrete solutions, but also in their capacity to inspire. The concept of the grand challenges for social work refers to significant societal issues that require innovative solutions and collaborative efforts among various stakeholders, including social workers, policymakers, community organizations, and the individuals they serve. These challenges are often systemic in nature, necessitating a holistic approach that considers the interplay of social, economic, and political factors. By identifying and addressing these grand challenges, social workers can contribute to the development of effective innovations that promote social change and improve the quality of life for marginalized populations. This collaborative approach not only enhances the effectiveness of social work interventions, but also fosters a sense of community ownership and empowerment among those affected by these challenges.
Am I on the wrong slide?
Yeah.
All right. Am I supposed to be ahead or behind?
Not on the next one.
Oh, next one. Okay.
Yeah. The Grand Challenges framework was formally articulated, identifying specific areas of focus such as poverty, health disparities, and the impact of trauma, emphasizing the need for evidence-based practices and interdisciplinary collaboration to tackle complex social issues. The timeline of the Grand Challenges of social work illustrates a dynamic evolution of the profession, reflecting broader societal changes and the continuous need for adaptation in addressing the pressing issues faced by individuals and communities. Despite the social work profession's unified commitment to identify and address widespread societal problems, there have been few scholarly articles that have focused on the grand challenges. This lack of extensive academic discourse is particularly significant given the profound implication these challenges have on both individual lives and broader societal structures. The absence of rigorous scholarly analysis on these grand challenges may hinder the profession's ability to effectively advocate for policy changes and implement evidence-based practices that can lead to significant societal transformation.
Great. So Lori gave you a background, right, on the grand challenges, and I think we all know how important they are. But she's absolutely right. Like when you look at the literature, there's really not, besides the grand challenges book, there's really not a lot written about the grand challenges. We're hoping to change that, and maybe some of you would be interested in being an author. We'll show you a call for papers at the end of this webinar. But we set out to really find out, since a lot wasn't written and they're so important, to find out really what do students know, new graduates know about the grand challenges? What do they think about them? Are they working on them? How did it impact their graduate education? And so we designed a survey that we wanted to do nationally to social workers who were leaving MSW programs. And so I will say right off the bat, this is a convenient sample. It only consists of 102 MSW graduates, but I think you will see, I'm hoping, that a lot of the findings will resonate with you and are probably generalizable to a much bigger group of individuals. So how did we find these graduates? These were individuals who were, and this was prior to the disparities report, these are individuals who were leaving MSW programs who attended entry level or master's LSW, LMSW test prep courses. And a total of 145 people completed the survey, but there were of 33 people that were excluded because they didn't meet the inclusion criteria. And then there were a couple of people there that were not MSW graduates, so they were also excluded. So again, the data that we're going to present is from 6 different states, 102 MSW graduates. So here you can also see on the right a little bit about the demographic information. The 38% of the MSWs had BSWs. The majority focused on working with individuals and families. They were getting licensed, so a lot of these were micro focused practitioners. A quarter reported being advanced generalist. And unfortunately, I know some of you are macro people out there. There was only 10% who stated that they had focused on meso or macro work. 70% were employed at the time of the survey. So I said this is obviously a convenient sample. The other thing I wanted to point out, many of you may know that there is a new grand challenge on gun violence. This was done prior to that grand challenge being added. So when I'm talking about the results, it will not include any specific reference to the grand challenge on gun violence. So these are actual tables from the article. And so first thing we wanted to find out is, where did students do their practicum placements? And as I said, quite a number of new graduates, former students, were working. And where were they working? So we gave them the list of the grand challenges, and we said, which one best fits your practicum and which one sort of best describes where you're working? So what do I want you to take from this chart, right? First of all, if you look, there's a very strong correlation between where they did their practicum and where they were employed, right? Which again, for those of us that are working in educational settings, that's not surprising. right? Often students get hired by their practicum, or they come in with a particular interest. So those two are highly related. The other thing I want you to see is that the vast majority of individuals are really only placed in practicum in settings that are covering a very small number of grand challenges. So if you look, we have, 66% of individuals were focused on only two of the grand challenges, advancing long and productive lives and ensuring healthy development for all children, with about 10% focused on closing the health gap, and a few more on creating social responses to a changing environment. There were no individuals placed in settings where it would be predominantly harnessing technology for social good, or reducing extreme inequality. And what you might say is, well, many placements cover multiple challenges. That's true, but these were not identified by these new graduates as the primary focus. Okay, we're going to talk about the implications of that in a minute. Okay, in a minute. So then what we did was we asked about their primary professional interest, and sort of, where did they want to focus their career, as well as sort of a general interest in working to address the challenge. Again, these are somewhat related, but not as strongly related, because social workers, this is a good thing, right? The social work graduates were interested in general in addressing all of the challenges. If you kind of look at the right, they had either a somewhat somewhat to strong interest in addressing those. However, again, when you look at their primary professional interest, you're going to see those same grand challenges that we just talked about, right? And this is not restricted just to those that were working, where it's focused mostly on children. Here we have some equal opportunity and justice, and advancing long and productive lives. I did want to say one thing about advancing long and productive lives. For those of you that have read the Grand Challenges books, it focuses a lot on older adult and aging, right, in the book. But when people were reading these, some of these, we found that very few new graduates knew what the grand challenges were. So we were just giving them the topic area. So when they were reading Advancing Long and Productive Lives, to many of them, aging or working with older adults wasn't necessarily coming to mind. They were thinking, oh, this has to do with, productivity of people, enhancing their well-being. So that's probably why it rated as highly as it did. And then if you look down, this is in rank order, one thing that's important is we had, it's a little depressing, we had no one say that they wanted to primarily focus on things like eradicating social isolation, or building financial capacity for all, and very few people focused on things like smart decarceration and technology. And again, speaking to those of you that work in social work programs, I don't know about you, but at our orientation, we often ask students, like, why did you want to get into social work, right? Do you want to work with older adults? No one raises their hand. Do you want to work on this? And then we talk about children, and children and families, and everyone's hand goes up. So this really reinforces what some of you may have seen even anecdotally in some of your programs. So we then asked a series of questions about the ability of the profession to make progress in addressing the grand challenges. That's the column over to the right. And also, we asked individuals to rate their own competency, right? We know from CSWE, self-efficacy and rating your own competency is not allowed as a benchmark measure, but we wanted people, we weren't using it for that purpose, to say, how comfortable do you feel, right? Again, when I look at this presentation, sometimes I'm happy and sometimes I'm not, because the good thing is that when we look at the competency, people, weren't necessarily saying they were very competent, but they graduated with at least, a little to basically somewhat competent in each of the challenges. So that, that is the glass half full part. And then when we look at their ranking of how did they think the profession would do in addressing these grand challenges? And we know they're interdisciplinary. They're not just for social work, they're for society as well. But you'll see they were more optimistic, if you will, about certain things like healthy development for all children, or the changing environment. And then they were less optimistic about things like building financial capacity for all, smart decarceration, ending homelessness, and some of those other grand challenges. So then we were looking at each of these. We decided that we would also combine them into overall indices to see whether, and create an indices for professional interest of all of the challenges, and overall indices of optimism about the profession to address the grand challenges, and an overall index to look at the competency. And as you might suspect, we got good Crumbach alphas. They hung together. And so when we looked overall, and again, this isn't necessarily surprising, but I think there are implications for us as educators. We saw that the strongest relationship was between competency, meaning the more competent that new graduates felt that they were, the more optimistic that they were that the profession would make progress, okay? Which makes sense. They think other people like them are out there. And so if they feel competent, they feel like, yeah, we can do something about this. The other thing is there was a pretty strong correlation between interest and competency. Again, makes sense, because if you're interested in something and you focus, right, in MSWs, education often has specializations. They were more likely to feel that they were competent. And then we found weaker relationships, though statistically significant, between interest and optimism. So when we look at these for all of the 13 grand challenges, right, that was the overall, there was a correlation, a significant correlation, even at the individual challenge level, for competency and interest. Again, focused, if they were interested, more likely to feel competent. For 12 of the 13, there wasn't a significant relationship related to the environment, but for all the rest, there was a significant relationship between competency and belief that the profession would make progress. And then less so, only 7, right? About half of them were there significant relationships between interest and the ability to make belief that the profession would make progress. So what does this all mean? Okay, what does this all mean? So one of the things that we found out, and Lori will talk more about this in a second, when we go to undergraduates, but what we found that for the most part, those that were graduating from MSW programs had little knowledge about the grand challenges. Many of them had, again, we asked them, did we know about them? But then we just asked them about the areas and the topics. They were not, they're familiar with healthy development for all children, but they had no idea of the Grand Challenges Initiative or or the work. So that's a bit depressing, even though we know, right, from other data not done by us, that many schools, I think the last data that I looked at was, in the 60 to 70% of schools say that they're using the grand challenges in the curriculum in some way. But these new graduates hadn't taken those courses. So the other thing that I think is significant is that we really have very few people graduating that are working and focused on some of the grand challenges. We have the vast majority focused on just maybe 3, right? And in this case, we had 13, but 3 of the 13 challenges. And to me, that's a problem, because if we say that we're committed to addressing these and building competency, and that social work is going to be at the table, we need to make sure that we have an adequate workforce that wants to, right, and is interested in and focusing in on these areas. And often our practicum settings, we see there's a strong correlation between practicum and employment. And I don't know about you, but we send out an interest questionnaire to students, and we say to them, where would you like to work? What population do you want to work with? And people only know what they know, right? And so many people go into social work because they've been helped by a social worker, or a school social worker has helped them, or they've had an aging parent, grandparent or something. And so they may not have ever encountered someone who's incarcerated, or, there's many other challenges where they don't have experience. And so as educators, we may not be doing either students or the profession, we may be doing them a disservice by just placing students in those areas that they want to work in before they have experience and exposure, right, to each of those grand challenge areas. And again, they had interest in most of the areas. There were a couple like smart decarceration and harnessing technology where the interest was professional interest was a little bit lower. And again, I don't know about you, but I not that we prioritize any one challenge over another, but those are 2 areas that we really seem to be particularly important to both social work and society. So that's important. The good news is that for the most part, there was perceived competency to the problems, and that this competency was really related to optimism. So people are leaving quite optimistic and feeling quite competent. But again, as I said earlier, that doesn't mean that they wanted to focus their career on there. And we also see that their interests aren't necessarily like, they're saying, oh yeah, we can make progress, but I'm not the one who's going to be working in this area, right? And so that leaves us with some gaps. So as I would challenge all of us, and hopefully we'll have a little time at the end after Lori talks, but to think about how we might be more creative related to our practicum experiences, and making sure that we have a broader array, if you will, since it seems like practicum ultimately results in where students, new graduates, end up working. And we also think about, right, even in our electives and in our core curriculum, some of those grand challenges, like smart decarceration and harnessing technology, and others, where we don't have as many students interested as a professional focus. So I'm going to turn it over to Lori. I'm scared to say this, but we're going to try the QR code one more time. And if it doesn't work here, and please don't pay $35. We will put the link in as well. Lori's going to transition, and maybe I can just lead in a second, Lori. That study was just an empirical study that we did, again, not at our own school, but just nationally for MSW graduates. We're going to talk now about what Seton Hall has done in their undergraduate program. Now that we know, right, and most of our students, probably just like yours, go on for MSW degrees. So we decided that we would revamp our curriculum, and we've done so. And we're going to talk about how we did it at Seton Hall. And this is a article that talks a little bit about the curriculum redesign that we did. And feel free. Are people telling me? Okay. Well, I'm a researcher, so I'm very reliable, but not valid. So I'm very reliable with my QR codes. I'm 2 for 2 not working. And here we will make sure you get it as well. I apologize. So don't worry. Lori, I'm going to go to the next slide.
Yes, you're there. Oh, yes. Okay, so I actually had the privilege of being a student of Dr. Apgar's, and I participated in the capstone experience. I have to say that I think Seton Hall is doing it right. I'm shameless plug for my alma mater. But in the capstone project, we were required to study the process by which they made the decisions, like what is going to be part of the grand challenges, as well as each one of us had to teach a class, facilitate a class about one of the grand challenges. In my case, it was about disabilities. I can't remember the exact title, so the day that I taught, I was working at the New Jersey Commission for the Blind at my internship, and at the New Jersey Commission for the Blind, they had like goggles that you could put on that would mimic like macro degeneration, or just different eye conditions where your vision is impaired. I also brought a white stick, and so the students got to experience what it's like to walk in the world with someone with a vision impairment. And as well as we did posters for different educational symposiums, and mine was about disability and voting rights. So what did I miss something, Dr. Apgar? I feel like I missed something.
No, it's just what I would say is for those of you, whether you have whether you have like a practicum course or a capstone course. When I got to Seton Hall in 2016, we have both, and we always kind of struggle to figure out how to make that meaningful, right? Not just like, oh, let's talk, or it's supposed to be the bridge to the profession. And so we revamped our course back in 2016. This is our capstone course. And it's really, I would love to say it was a stroke of genius, but it wasn't. It was just trying to figure out what would work, and how we could make sure that students, were exposed to different kinds of things. And so, as Lori mentioned, there have been what her year did, it's changed. During COVID, we had different assignments, but we've had students go out to agencies in the past. We've had individuals interview consumers or clients from their that were related, that were like being affected by the grand challenge. Of course, my lawn is getting mowed now, but so there are a lot, and I would love to, we'll talk, we'll have a few minutes, but love to hear other kind of creative ideas. But I think the point is for students to get exposed to populations, not child welfare, not where they might be working, and to pick a grand challenge that they didn't know a lot about, and be a be a teacher by teaching others, and more so than anything, really a lot of experiential. Did you talk about the research and the posters? Sorry, I was reading the chat.
I did, yeah, so I mentioned my poster. The thing, it was very, like having the different students be the facilitators in the class and creating the posters, it it really was an opportunity to get excited about what we could do as social workers. Because sometimes we think, oh, social workers do this, and it's just this very small thing. You either teach or you help kids, and it's like social work is a really exciting field right now that you can do almost anything in. And it really was an opportunity for us to kind of dig into it. And that's what the Grand Challenges is supposed to do, right? Get people excited, and, try to think outside of the box.
And the other thing I would just say is when they were doing this, they all had to buy the book. That was our course text, and we would, go over it. And that there were a lot of, they also were supposed to go and use like websites and things like interactive. So people would pay, how to survive on $5 a day or something, different kinds of activities. But one thing that was really interesting is when they went into practicum and they talked to, this is a problem as well, when they talked to their practicum instructor in the agency, most of the people out there didn't know about the Grand Challenges either. And so we talk about practicum being our sort of signature pedagogy, and yet we're not necessarily connecting. It's like journal articles, right? They can never, they don't, practicum instructors don't have access to journal articles a lot of times. And so it's really hard to bridge the academic and the practice into, if those that are in practicum aren't even aware of that.
Yeah, and I also want to say, just before I started my graduate level, I was writing these papers with Dr. Apgar, and I went to my graduate school, and I was like, oh, I'm writing this paper about the Grand Challenges of social work. And I was going to school with people from all over the country, and they were like, what's the Grand Challenges of social work? And even some of the professors didn't know what the Grand Challenges of social work. So
this is the glass half empty part of the webinar. So sorry, it's a little depressing. You want to talk a little bit just about satisfaction, or
sure,
you
you're
want
best,
me to?
but so it's clear, like, people haven't heard about the Grand Challenges of social work. 9% had, 91% have afterwards. People had a lot of satisfaction. I wasn't part of this group that got, but I had a lot of satisfaction from our course. And would you recommend it? Extremely likely was more than half, somewhat likely was 35%, and neither was 9%. How important do you think the class is? It's like almost half thought it was really important, or 85% plus thought it was at least somewhat important, and more than half were very satisfied with the format of the class.
The other thing I forgot to mention, two other things, and Lori, I don't remember if this was in your cohort. I'm looking, some of my favorite people are in this webinar, but I asked the students if they got extra credit, if they would write to the authors of the Grand Challenges chapter. And they said they were just like, oh my God, like I couldn't do that. That was, these are people, they were so intimidated. And every single student who did it for extra credit uh, got a reply.
Yeah,
And so it also was a great way of sort of bridging, and making students realize that what they're reading out there in journal articles, or they're reading in books and things like that, that these are real social workers, and that we're all in this together, whether you're a student, you're a practitioner, you're a scholar. And so they were thrilled. And I told them how people love to get emails about their work, and that included the Grand Challenges authors. So that was fun. And then another thing just related to like critical thinking was we were Yeah, we were, I also had them critique the chapters, and they were supposed to, Lori, did your cohort do that, critique what wasn't covered, or was that, I can't remember, I changed it
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I emailed one of the authors.
Okay. And
Yeah.
you got a response, right?
Oh yeah, it was so lovely. And it was like made me feel like a real social worker, not just some student, like, yeah, it was lovely. And of course.
But the critique, I think, is important too, because, again, when students are reading books or articles, they're like, oh, wow, these are people who are so much, they know a lot more. And I think it was really, they came up with some really great ideas, and I helped them in class to try to formulate those into suggestions when they wrote to the author. Like, when you did this, it sounds like, yeah, it's out, I did it, have you thought of this? Or I noticed you didn't like someone had said you didn't mention people with disabilities, in this chapter as much as I would have liked. Or so it was also a way for students to critically analyze the literature and improve their sort of critical thinking. So there's always lots of great ideas, which is great. And then I'm scared now. I'm scared, but we're gonna but if not, I will, after I stop sharing, I'm gonna put these are in the chat. You will see one QR code is just, for our emails and things like that. But what I really want to do is, I know many of you that are here are interested in the grand challenges, and I know advances in social work. I think actually we responded to a call for papers. I think they did a special issue, which is where our one article appeared. But we would love to make the connection with undergraduate social work education, because there's lots of connections for doctoral students and others. But I think it's really important that individuals who are entering the profession, have this as a foundation. So, oh, good. Thank you so much. So we are looking for papers that, papers that will talk about teaching notes of how you might have incorporated it, innovative assignments, administrative notes, empirical articles. So we're hoping that you're going to be a partner in this, and I would love to. And even though this, let me stop sharing so I can see people, but even though this is an undergraduate journal, it could be related to a first year MSW course as well. It's geared to BSW educators, so it needs to be focused on generalist practice and not the specialization year. But if you are an MSW educator and you have an innovative way to incorporate it into human behavior or some, research methods or other things, would love to hear those as well. So we have about 15 minutes left. Feel free to come on camera, raise your hand. I've been trying to keep up with the chat. Just, we're here. Anyone want to speak up? I'd let anyone have any better ideas?
Evans, I think. Raised his hand, I think.
I could probably take a lesson in how to generate a free QR code. So if anyone can help me with that, that would be good as well. Is anyone doing this? Integrating? Oh, Evans? Can you unmute yourself? Go ahead. We are being recorded, but don't worry.
Yes, I don't know. Here in South Africa is evening. I mean, in South Africa, and I got to be interested in grand challenges. I was doing my literature review for my PhD because it was focusing on informal way speakers. Then I came across this thing of grand challenges. So, it interested me because I was grappling with how social work is responding to sustainable development goals. then I found that through these grand challenges, we are able to respond to sustainable development. And here in South Africa, the grand challenge concept is not popular in academia, and our curriculum does not even touch on that sustainable development and even grand challenges. So it's a great platform, and I want to explore it. I'm interested in. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us, and it's really exciting. It would be interesting to think about the application of the grand challenges right within your curriculum, and also, you know, maybe some of the it is societal, and I think it's supposed to be, you know, global, but I'm sure there are lots of examples, right, that may be specific to South Africa that, you know, you could bring forth, and application. So I would love to, you know, hear about your work, and how these, you know, these grand challenges might help you as you're, you know, conceptualizing. And I don't know if you're working on your PhD or you've graduated, but working or graduated.
You're muted.
Yes, I'm working on it. I'm I'm writing up my thesis, and I'm hoping to submit it next year, February. So yeah, it's because my work is around these informal waste pickers who are scavenging through the waste that people just throw around, and they are making a living out of it. But they are not aware that when they are doing that thing, they are also contributing to sustainable development in terms of the environment. They are doing environmental protection. So that's another thing that emerged in my study, that these people, they are not aware that what they're doing they are contributing to sustainable development goals.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, the topic is fascinating. I would love to hear more about that. And certainly I think where we are, we could learn a lot, right? You know, we talk about reduce, reuse, recycle, and, you know, but we, you know, we don't do as good a job as we can, and sustainability is a major issue. So
Pilar.
Pilar.
Oh, sorry.
Pilar, are you there?
Okay, yeah. It wasn't allowing me to unmute myself for some reason. Um, and so I have a question. I didn't learn about the grand challenges until after I graduated from my MSW program, which I guess is a bit confusing because my concentration was macro. It was community organizing, planning, and development. But however, now that I've learned about it and I've spoken to actually a student who went to Seton Hall, and they were like, have you heard about it? Like, let's write something. And so within P4P, we're telling more students as well, like, hey, is this, like, if you're interested in research, like, this is something that we could all do. And like trying to get more and more like students involved, because this is what, you know, what's affecting them the most. But I find it curious. Why do you think, I guess I'm wondering, why we don't learn about like the grand challenges? Like why some schools do and some schools don't?
Yeah, I would, you know, this is just my, I think we teach what we know, unfortunately, right? We get a little insular, and as educators, and the grand challenges are relatively new. I'm just, you know, not that, and so many people weren't exposed to them in there. It's like a cycle, right? They didn't learn about them in their educational program, and as a result, they didn't learn about them when they're out, right? In the you know, in the field. And so now when they come back as educators, you know, they still don't. And so I think that's, you know, one reason. And then I also feel like and Pilar, I think, you can probably, it's kind of like, well, that's something else for the people. So the people who I know who have learned about them, they kind of are like, well, that's what the academics, those are what the researchers, that's like the big, it's not brought down, right? Like to the level of we're all in this. And so we need to make it real for students, which is a challenge. And one of the reasons, this came out in one of them is that, some of these challenges, when they first started reading about them, they were like, these are so massive, like ending homelessness, like that's never going to happen. And so students were like, this is like pie in the sky. Like, how is this going to affect me? So we talked a lot about that, right, in class, Lori, about how, what could they do? And how could this be translated, even if you're not doing research, like how could you be part of the solution? So I think those are just some of the, I think the macro micro divide is, a problem a little bit too, because some of these have a strong policy connection.
Yeah, I mean, I remember in class, that was one of the critiques that almost all of us had, was like, this feels so like such a huge thing, and who am I but a tiny little ant in this, big, huge problem. But then breaking it down into like, oh, but there are ways that we can make a dent in it. Nobody's saying one person is responsible to eradicate it. It's just like making a dent.
Yeah, Pilar, what do you think?
Okay, I was just typing, it's not allowing me
Oh,
to
sorry.
unmute. So the way that we frame it at P4P when we talk about the grand challenges is like, these are issues that affect us as well, social justice, social inequity. Like, how can we stop there from being barriers to people receiving a social work education? There are so many socio-political, economic factors that stop students while they're ahead, or from doing this. And also we frame it in a way of like, if we don't treat ourselves well, like what does it say about the communities that we work with, our value for them, if we don't value ourselves? It's all interconnected, interrelated. And so that's how at least I've been able to frame it and connect it. Like, you have to do the work, and like numbers talk, and this is what's going to get people to listen.
I completely agree. I think the interconnection is important. Again, we're very siloed, I think, as a profession, right? Like, here's the macro people, here's the micro, here's the doctoral students, here's the MSW students, and we have to do a better job. And actually, that's what I like about the grand challenges, is it's the one thing that I think connects us. And it's a good foundation. So that's really why I got interested and, really decided at Seton Hall. I'm familiar with some of the doctoral, programs that focus on that. But at Seton Hall, I was like, well, this is a great way for students to get exposed to everything that is our profession, and right, and to just like plant those seeds so that when they're going out, and then they become the MSW students, they become the the practicum instructors. So I think I would love, that's why I like the special issue. I think we need more like innovative ways. I just told you one way, but I think we need maybe some sort of like curricular resources, or teaching resources to help people think about how they might incorporate this. I think that's another reason, Pilar, it doesn't kind of fit in the curriculum. We know how to teach research, we know how to teach policy, we know how, right, in these, but we don't, grand challenges, we thought about an elective, but then, not everyone takes an elective. So that's really why we put it in our core curriculum, but it's hard to find a place, which is why I sort of challenged people to think about either if they have a capstone or even practicum. I mean, it would fit nicely in a practicum course because people are in different settings, you know, and then they come together to talk about their, you know, what we used to call field, but practicum experiences. And, you know, I could see it fitting there as well. Yeah, Donna.
You're muted, Donna.
Oh, yeah, you're muted, Donna.
Thanks.
Oh,
I was getting messages saying that
oh,
the
sorry.
host has not allowed me to unmute. Well, Dawn, since you mentioned policy, I want to say that in the SWAPS you know, course, the undergraduate and graduate level course, there is room to introduce the grand challenges, because when students have to create policies, especially in the second half of the course, when they have to go to legislators and you know, think about a social problem and create policies, they could use these topics. Um, it's something that I have introduced when I was teaching the SWAPS 2 class, and I also introduced them in the undergraduate bachelor's level, the introduction to social work class. The last chapter is on future challenges. So, you know, it's at least it's introduced. Now, whether they'll remember them by the time they get to, you know, their master's program is another thing, but they are introduced. But I do think in policy, you know, we could start formulating assignments around these grand challenges specifically.
Oh, good. And Kara's putting some resources in as well. You know what I like? You know, when we talk about the CSWE competencies, right? Like people would say, like, what's social work? Why should I be a social worker? And I like it because it's a list. I actually have it on, you know, a PowerPoint when I'm doing like admissions things. And I'm like, this is what you're going to learn. I feel like we could do more when people are saying, well, we always have trouble defining ourselves, right? Like, who are social workers? What do they do? I feel like we could bring it in there too, just to even non-social, like here are the, you know, we talk about challenges, but that's, if you really think of everything that we do, it kind of fits there. Like, these are what we focus on. These are our problems. And it's, I think, a way of sort of conceptualizing what do we do, which we sometimes have trouble, right, you know, talking about. Dr. Tawanda Hubbard, did you want to say something?
No, you raised such a great point there about how it can be utilized to be able to convey who we are, what we do, and then most importantly, our contributions. Because as social workers, we don't own helping, right? We share helping with other professions. At the same time, I think that students having a clear way, as well as early social work professionals, to be able to articulate in these host settings and within interdisciplinary teams that we find ourselves a part of. What is it that we bring to the table? Because I think that there is an image out there that in certain spaces social work is seen as at the bottom, and we have a lot of great skills and abilities, and we're fantastic bridge makers, and you know, we're change agents, we're agents of dignity, and also too we learn how to negotiate being in roles of agents of control, right? And so being able to know how to articulate our contributions and who we are and what we do, I think it's so important.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would elevate this, you know, sort of the perception of the profession. If we just got into, instead of, you know, me explaining it, if I could just get a 30-second grand challenges pitch, I'll put it out there, right? Of this, you know, work it in. I feel like that would be a great way of just explaining what social workers do and the difference we make.
Yeah.
Quincy,
Wouldn't that be a great theme for a poster contest?
yes. Yes, we'll get our students. Quincy,
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to double down on what Dr. Hubbard just said. And hey, Dawn. Um, so many times when we're teaching our students and they're trying to connect, oftentimes they're asking like, how does this apply to me? How do we do this in real life? And one of the things that I try to inspire them to understand is that your point of entry into an issue or a problem or a concern is not always going to be your point of departure, right? So even if I'm teaching an addictions course, it may start with me talking about addictions, but it may go into homelessness, right? It may go into social isolation when they're doing different types of needs assessments. Harnessing technology for social good may come into play because how are these individuals applying for things, right? Or advancing longer productive lives, depending on how old those individuals are, right? Depending on what the population is. So keeping it informative enough, but also flexible enough for people to zoom in and zoom out based on what their problem area is, and increasing your problem area increases your solution area, right? So zoom in, zoom out, but just allow them to kind of be inspired by these things that are more innovative and not being so held to exactly what the quote unquote academics do, right? Because we all have our own things and our own ways of doing and knowing and learning too, right? So just inspiring them to look at those things in different ways.
thanks so much, Quincy. I really appreciate that. And I really think it's a great, I know we're wrapping up here, but it's a great conceptual framework. When I was at CSWE last week, I was talking to a colleague there, and she's a dean at one of the bigger schools, and she showed me their impact report for this past year, and they organized all of their faculty research and, their all of their accomplishments in those grand challenge areas. She used the grand challenges as a framework. So, and I thought, wow, that was a great way of doing that. So I want to thank all of you for your great and innovative ideas, and just say we're all there. We're all in this together. I'm hoping maybe we could do this again in about a year, and we'll have lots of other great ideas and curricular resources as well. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.